Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. We're back after a little break. I'm Mike.
I'm José.
You've been on holiday.
I've been on a cultural tour.
Oh.
Sweden and Denmark.
How very cultural. And what did you learn?
I went to the Danish Film Institute and I went to the Swedish Film Institute, and I got a chance to see a lot of really interesting films. And I learned a lot, but not something to talk about in this podcast.
No, this podcast is about Black Panther.
Which I, in fact, did see in Stockholm earlier. So unlike our usual podcast, which is really just we see a film blind without having read anything about it, and then we come immediately here and just talk about what we've seen. In this one, actually, because Black Panther has been such a phenomenon, we have, in fact, kind of read some stuff on it, and in fact, we've both had the opportunity of seeing the film before.
Yeah, so we've both seen it individually, and then we've both just been to see it for a second time today.
That's right.
Which is what we've come back from. So there's already been an ongoing conversation. It came out this weekend, and I think broke box office records. I think it broke the opening weekend record.
Yes.
It doubled Justice League's.
Yes.
Justice League did about $90 million, and this did about 180.
Yes, and one of the things that has been fascinating me, really, is not just the many discourses around it, which we'll get to in a little bit, but I had the opportunity of seeing the film in Sweden and now here in Birmingham. And in Sweden, it was really fascinating because, you know, kind of there are all these, it was all full of like Aryan Vikings, really. And every joke seemed to land, right? It's kind of, you know, and I kept thinking, like, what are these, you know, tall blonde Swedes responding to in this film? And they responded to everything, all the colonial jokes and everything. And actually watching it just now in Birmingham was interesting because there seemed to be a fight at the back, right? You know, so...
Both times I've seen it in Birmingham, there's been really bad behaviour in the audience.
Mm.
The first time I saw it, the cinema was completely packed out. There wasn't a seat left in the place, which was quite good. And it was we saw it on Sunday evening, and it was a real weekend crowd. It was kind of a young rowdy crowd that was really up for it, and everyone was really excited to see it. You could tell, you know. Yes. I mean, so was I as well. Even though the fact I was incredibly tired.
People were unusually piggy in the audience. You know, like sometimes you get a film in which somebody answers their phone, or you know, in the middle of it starts messaging. But actually, the crowd for this particular film, I thought was a bit out of control. Well, in fact, it was out of control.
You should have seen it the other day. It was worse.
Yeah?
Yeah, it was.
Well, I mean, I think maybe a positive way of seeing it is that the film is drawing a crowd that's not used to going to the cinema.
That's the corollary that I was going to get to. Like, it was also, you know, we talk about film being, or the cinema being a communal experience. We seeing film in a crowd, and it's very different to seeing a film on your own.
Yes.
And it was kind of exciting. Like, it got annoying at points. There was particularly two guys behind me who were on their phones the whole time, and that was incredibly fucking annoying. But the experience of a crowd... In fact, it was like that when I went to see Magic Mike. The crowd was rather like that, like really up for it and wanting a sort of, like wanting a show.
Yeah.
You know? And so that made it a kind of a really fun experience.
Yes. Well, I mean, for me, both times it's been a really fun experience. So what do you think of it?
It's so smart. It's a film that's made by the African diaspora, about the African diaspora, for the African diaspora, and it's made like we talk a lot, you and I, about black actors in particular, black British actors. Especially kind of taking American roles. We talk about that a lot because it's something that's come up, and we've said before, Samuel L. Jackson had a lot to say about it, that it was, you know, you need to have that experience, and when you don't come from the same country, it's not the same. But in this film, there are black actors from all over the world coming together, and it feels like really deliberate and really purposeful, because this is a film about how Africa was stolen by colonizers, and black people were spread across the world by no fault of their own, by no means of their own, and how there's a kind of struggle to maintain a kind of core black identity, perhaps, or the kind of tension. So, for instance, Killmonger. Obviously, we're going to get into spoiler territory early on. Like, this is, you've got to have seen the movie, and you should go and see it. It's brilliant. So, so Killmonger, the villain, played by Michael B. Jordan, is African American. And I don't just mean that to mean black, the way that Americans, kind of refer to black people. But literally, he's African American. He's half Wakandan, his dad, and half American, his mum. And he grows up in between these two cultures. And it's like if you think about African American as a term, like you're not respected as an African because you're not sort of from there, but you're not respected as an American fully because your country doesn't fully respect you. So you grow up in between these two worlds, which is exactly what his character's done. And he's kind of trying to find this identity.
Yes.
The villain's amazing. People have said a lot about how the villain is the best Marvel villain there's been.
Well, I think without a doubt.
Without a doubt. And Marvel's taken a lot of flack for his villains basically being boring. But this one, what's really interesting about Killmonger is you agree with him in part. There's a lot to learn from him. T'Challa, the protagonist and Black Panther, he learns from him by the end. Yes. So even though he's defeated and he dies, like I know he's defeated and he dies, but you learn from him and he helps the main character grow and he has a point. And not only that, but he's not really defeated. He's true to his principle by the end. His last line is amazing.
Yes.
His last line about he's been
buried at sea.
Yeah, he's been stabbed by T'Challa. And he says, we can heal you because we've got Wakandan technology. We can heal you and we can make you right again. He's like, what, just to throw me in jail? And he says, I forget what the line is exactly, but he refers to slaves that threw themselves off slave ships while they were being transported from Africa to America and South America. He refers to them and said they knew that dying was preferable to a life in chains.
Yes.
And that's what he does. He forces himself to die. He removes the spear from his side and kills himself, essentially. Because he knows that the alternative is unbearable, a life of bondage and slavery.
Which is very allegorical, right? I mean, it is what happens to, I forget how many, what the statistics is about how many African-American men are in jail, but it's completely disproportionate. It's systemic, it's a kind of enslavement in the sense that all of these black men are providing, free labor in prisons.
Well, very lowly, but they do get paid, but it's pennies.
It's slave labor.
Yes, it is.
There's no other way of
putting it. It's the new slavery.
So actually, the U.S.'s position on this is absolutely indefensible, and that is the character that Michael B. Jordan is depicting. Yeah. So, some people have read the T'Challa Killmonger relationship as standing in, for the liberation philosophies of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, with Killmonger kind of being, the Malcolm X figure, the revolutionary who believes in violence.
Fighting fire with fire.
Yes, and who has an international perspective. And I think you see both of those. But actually, I think the film's achievement for me is actually in lending weight to both of those positions, and actually in the casting of Michael B. Jordan, making the villain a more magnetic and heroic figure than actually the protagonist. So actually, though he dies, his death has a particular weight in that, the biggest star, most charismatic person in all of the film is the villain.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of really interesting. But I want to comment also, one of the things that caught my eye is in looking at the credits, the cinematographer, the set design, the costume design, the production designer, the casting person were all women. And I think in this instance, the cinematographer and the production design, are both of interest, because actually those are positions that are not normally filled by women. And actually you can see in the film how the film has a particular feminist stance, right? So there's T'Challa, who's surrounded by women, who all the warriors are women, who is kind of protected by women, who fights alongside women, whose own sister is like the scientific genius who keeps inventing all of these things. as opposed to the people he fights against, who are almost all surrounded by men. It's really there's a really interesting feminist dynamic in the film somehow.
I think the film. There's something really interesting going on with Killmonger in that respect. So there's this idea. Not only is T'Challa surrounded by women, like there's that scene where he first returns to Wakanda after bringing back Lupita Nyong'o's character Nakia. He's surrounded by his mother, Nakia, his sister, and the general and her kind of subordinate, who are all women. Yeah. And this is like, the film is presenting. It's not a completely maternal world, because ultimately it's still ruled by a king, and then his son then becomes king. But nonetheless, there's an importance placed on women, and then the central thing that gives Black Panther his powers is this flower. Yes. Which is a real symbol of femininity. It's this flower that is kind of used to create this sort of soup.
The serum.
That provides Black Panther his powers, and it's really interesting because that is used 3 times. It's used to first give Black Panther his powers, then it's used to give Michael B. Jordan his powers when he becomes Black Panther, and then it's used finally to give T'Challa his powers again to re-become the king. And each time, it sends you into a kind of a trip almost. It sends you to the ancestral plane. It suggested that this is not really a trip. This is actually accessing a kind of other dimension where your ancestors live on. And in this ancestral plane, there's a real feeling of sort of tell me how you feel, like talking to your ancestors. And so they're all men in there, but they're talking to each other in about as honest a way as they possibly can. Like, there's this thing that I remember Michael Caine saying about acting. He says, with crying, a woman will cry, and a man will do anything but cry. And there's this thing about kind of resisting your own emotions, and so these guys become about as open as they can emotionally in this dream world, and still they're kind of there's just a single tear. It's not a full expression of emotion. But what's really interesting is when Killmonger goes into his trip to the ancestral plane and he meets his dad again. There's a kind of reconnecting with his dad, who obviously died when he was young. And he kind of wipes a tear away, but it is this really restrained thing. And then he wakes up in this burst of emotion, like he's had this minor show of emotion in the dream, but it explodes into violence when he wakes up, and actually he strangles a woman. Yes. Orders the flowers to be all destroyed.
Well, I want to talk about ordering the flowers to be destroyed, because the shape of those flowers, they're really quite labial, it has that kind of shape. And then, when they turn it into this infusion, it's like purple with molten lava, with a consistency of molten lava or something. So and those flowers are normally tended by men. What's the actor who?
Forrest Whitaker.
Forrest Whitaker, plays that character who tends to these flowers that kind of, give the king of Wakanda the powers of the Black Panther, right? So when we were talking before about, the kind of, the feminine, the masculine, kind of when Killmonger comes in, his burning of, the flower is like a kind of a burning of the feminine in some way, I thought.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And there's this thing going on with, I think there's a commentary on sort of toxic masculinity in there as well. Like I say, this idea that his emotional self is so kind of restrained within him, and he doesn't know how to access it. And then when he goes into his ancestral plane and he sees his dad and he's made to cry, he doesn't know how to handle that, and he's ashamed by it, and he wakes up, like I say, and wants to destroy things because he doesn't know how to handle himself emotionally. There's a real commentary on, I think, toxic masculinity and the idea that men need to learn how to express themselves emotionally, and that kind of accept that there's no shame in that, and that it's healthy, Because if you don't, then you explode into violence and this unhealthy kind of way of being.
Yes. I mean, I think one of the many interesting things that I found about this film is that it's the first of the Marvel superhero films that I would not call an American film. So it begins and ends in Oakland, California, right? But in between, it really is kind of, it feels like an international production, kind of made up of kind of many different people from many different places, where kind of, all of Africa in the world is a presence, yeah? So the primary address of this film is not to an American audience. It is to a world audience, which includes America, though actually a lot of the jokes in the film are slightly anti-American.
Yeah.
So,
well, there's a whole thing about the CIA guy. I love when he's referred to the little sister who's in charge of the science lab. Is incredibly cheeky and funny and like doesn't wear the kind of traditional dress and all that sort of thing, and they save Martin Freeman's character who's a CIA guy, and she goes, "Oh, don't sneak up on me, colonizer."
Yes.
And she says colonizer as just a nickname.
Yes.
A sobriquet. Like it's not a sort of, she's not using it to insult him. Or
she is though.
Well, no, a little bit, but like it is, it's a
joke. It's a joke,
right? She's kidding on the square.
Yeah,
but it's like, but it is nonetheless. It's light-hearted and like she, because he individually is no threat. So like it's a kind of nickname. It's delivered as a friendly nickname, but it's also it's like it is meaningful beneath that.
I want to highlight actually because it's a film that, I mean, part of the wonder, I there's so much I admire of it. So kind of let me go in particular order. The production design is absolutely fantastic, and it's absolutely fantastic in ways that raise questions for me on every level, right? So, for example, all of the blankets that the different people wear in them, that they have some significance. Yeah, that it's probably like the colors or the patterning of some part of Africa or, some tribe.
The designs of the tribes in general, like particularly I'm thinking of the guy with the disc in his lip. Like, that's a joke, right? It's a joke, but it's also...
I don't think it's a joke.
Well, I mean, it's funny that he has a huge disc in his lip and then he tries to speak. It's quite funny. I think it is done as a bit of a joke.
I didn't see it as a joke. I saw it as...
But I think it's also...
a different tribe.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there are elements that are made into jokes. So, for example, the fact that he changes the disc inside his lip... to color coordinated with whatever suit he's wearing.
Yeah.
So I think there are bits of it that
that's what I mean.
joke.
I don't think it's like essentially done as a joke, but I think it's used as a joke. There's a light-hearted aspect to it, but it's not mocking.
Though almost everything in this film can be turned into a joke. And actually, so on the one hand, I think it's a deeply serious film. On the other hand, it is a film with a sense of humor about everything. There are jokes all over, and they all hit, they all land, they work. But it's also a film that is incredibly satisfying, I think, in all levels. It looks wonderful. I thought the action was filmed wonderfully. You saw actions completed. And I love the design of the costumes. I mean, if you compare, the Black Panther costume, lithe, skin-tight, kind of enabling action, also having particularities of, of power, of movement, and so on, but looking fantastic. If you compare them to the Batman and Superman film, where kind of Ben Affleck looked like he was hiding under a tank, these are very, very, very striking kind of use of color, of imagery, done very purposefully, and every aspect of it is, on the one hand, very satisfying. You like what you see. It works. On the other hand, it raises questions, and by raising questions, I don't mean as problems, but as things that you want to find out more about, right? So what are the designs on the faces? What is the significance of the blankets? There are particular color schemes that I'm sure have some significance. You rarely see them in cinema in these ways. The use of the music, right? Which obviously has particular African rhythms throughout, and then it has hip hop music at the beginning and at the end in the California sequences, right? there seems to be like a story behind each, or a purpose behind each. It's not accidentally chosen, right?
Actually, the music, I mean, the kind of electronic and hip hop elements are there throughout. They show up particularly in action sequences again.
Yes.
I mean, I think probably particularly with Killmonger's character, but they kind of show up, like they're integrated really nicely. So you do have the kind of sort of African sort of drums and kind of tribal music, and you have American hip hop and electronic music, and then you also have just kind of general Marvel orchestral score, all integrated really nicely. It's the first Marvel score I've heard in a long time that I thought was actually really good. Normally they just kind of blend in and they're pretty anonymous. I mean, it's probably the first one in the Marvel Cinematic Universe I can think is good. Like the last one I think that was any good in Marvel was probably like the Spider-Man movies before Iron Man came out. So that's before the MCU happened. So hopefully it kind of shows some progression that way, because music's really, really important, and when it's used just as a sort of in such a basic way that Marvel has been doing for a long time, you're missing a whole aspect to a movie.
I think it's the best Marvel film so far.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah. Oh, easily. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it feels
that's quite something.
No, it really is. It feels the most purposeful, the most interesting. It really has something to say in its movie. It's this thing of what we were saying about. In fact, it made me think about Thor Ragnarok again, because I listened to that podcast the other day. I listened back to it, and actually, I don't think we were as unfair as I thought. Oh, we've probably been a bit harsh on this, and actually, I don't think we were that harsh. I think we were probably about right. But something that we did miss in it was this kind of undercurrent that it has. In fact, it's not so much an undercurrent as a real sort of plot point of Asgard's history of colonialism. There's this idea in Thor Ragnarok, which we completely didn't pick up on, about the idea that Asgard is not a perfect place, and it has a shady past, and they've literally painted over their own past, because when Hela comes back, the Cate Blanchett character, she kind of reveals underneath these paintings there's a true history of colonialism, and it's the idea of the kind of the powerful. It's like the idea of the history being written by the victors, and so it made me think about that, because then there's a huge strain of talk about colonialism in this, because there's this really interesting thing that so they refer to the CIA guy as colonizer, and there's this thing of because I thought actually, is he colonized really? It would be more interesting if he was English, right? Because they were the true colonizers. But then actually, no. Well, this is what let me finish my train of thought, because that's what I initially thought. But then I thought, well, no, the only difference really between the way that America kind of invades the rest of the world and the way we invaded the rest of the world was that we actually claimed that it was ours and we put a flag down. America doesn't say, "Oh, this is American land now." But they go in and take everything.
Yes, they topple governments and take over the economy.
Exactly.
So so on.
So kind of I immediately realised that actually it's perfectly justified that he's a CIA guy, and an American is what I mean. But there's this interesting thing with the tension between T'Challa and Killmonger. So you refer to them as being like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X in their kind of attitude to violence and black liberation. But there's also a thing about how... So Wakanda is a place that has immense natural riches, right? An asteroid or meteor landed there, made of vibranium, which is the most valuable metal in the world, and it gives you incredible power and it can be used for all these types of things. And Wakanda, these 5 tribes of Wakanda... They connected over it, and they said, we're going to keep this a secret, and they shut themselves off from the rest of the world. And so they portray themselves. They are a real country. Well, Wakanda's not a real country, but in the film, Wakanda is a real country that just tells the rest of the world that we're just a normal African country, and they don't get involved. But secretly, kind of behind a veil, behind a technological shield, they are incredibly technologically advanced, and they just keep themselves to themselves.
And it's a technology that is theirs.
Yes.
Yes, it's an African technology that's a bit like magic, that it's so advanced scientifically that it's almost magical, but that actually has its origin and is developed through, both African natural resources and African savvy,
Yes.
African know-how.
So, and
That's important.
And there is a little bit. I mean, the vibranium stuff is a little bit annoying insofar as it's used as this thing that can do anything. You know, so we sew it into our clothes and we can make stuff invisible, and it's like there's this thing of vibranium just means magic in a way. Like actually, Wakanda to some extent is like Hogwarts. And it's like they have magic, and you have to go through platform 9 3/4 to get there, and you just you keep yourself, you kind of separate from the real world.
No, that's not fair.
No, I think it is fair, because
that's
how it's portrayed. That there's this element of it's just magic.
No, it's not just magic, and actually, almost every tool is explained to you. So, you know, when you go through the suit and what the suit can do and how it absorbs force and so on.
They say what it can do, but there's no kind of thing of like compare it to the flower, for instance. The flower that gives Black Panther his powers has one thing that it can do,
and that's magic. That's magic.
No, but this is what I'm comparing it to. Actually, that seems like less magical, because that has one thing it can do, and it just does that one thing. Whereas vibranium is like it can do this, and it can do that, and it can do the other, and we can just make whatever we want with it. You know.
Up to a point I see it, but actually I think the film goes to trouble to explain how each of those things work. So it's true that you don't know to what extent it's the vibranium that can do that, or is that it's the scientific know-how that can do that. But
everything kind of comes. This is a minor point. Let's not get off the track. I think that's just a minor point. I do think it's fair to make that point. But where were we? So there's this idea of Wakanda being like, imagine if Africa was untouched, basically. You know, because Africa does have these immense natural resources, which is one of the reasons that people came there. The other reason that people came there was just to steal Africans, which that's a whole other thing. Which they're still doing. But that's a different issue. But the idea of kind of natural resources, geological resources.
China has bought, I don't know how much of it.
Yeah. So there's an idea that, like, imagine if Africa was untouched, what it could have made of itself. And obviously that only goes so far, because vibranium is not a real material. Anyway.
Well, it is a comic book film, so...
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm saying the analogy only goes so far. But to get back to the point that I was initially making, as well as the kind of difference in black liberation, the idea of kind of who they represent in black liberation terms or civil rights terms, there's also this difference between Killmonger and T'Challa in how they would run a country and how they see kind of... So T'Challa initially wants to follow the tradition set by his father and set by all his antecedents, which is to remain secret and keep Wakanda technology just for Wakanda and not get involved in conflicts in the rest of the world. And what Killmonger wants to do is colonize. It's spelled out. He says at one point, we will use the colonizers' tactics against them. I know how they think. He's been trained, I think importantly, he's been trained by SEALs and by American Special Forces to become the killer that he is. So he has this...
I don't think the intention is to colonize. I think
that's exactly what he says. He says the intention is to colonize and to run the world the way that we understand how, the way that we see fit. And he says, I understand their tactics, they train me, and I will use their tactics against them.
But that's different than saying that we will colonize, because, you know, kind of the idea is to disrupt everything and to destroy.
But the idea is also to take over. I think the idea is to take over and to run the world. And what T'Challa eventually kind of, the idea that he comes to at the end is what Nakia has been saying all along, which is that we can help the world. We're strong enough to maintain our own stability in our own nation, but also be open with the world about who we are and what our technology is, and use it to help everybody, not just black people around the world, not just the African diaspora, but everybody really. And that's kind of, I think, ultimately what they come to. So there's this thing of there's this conflict between the idea of like, again, fighting fire with fire and using the colonizers' tactics against them, or kind of taking the moral high ground and doing something that is, you know, moving on and doing the right thing. I don't know. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought slightly, but like there's another. But that's another kind of central conflict between Killmonger and T'Challa, which I think is really interesting.
Another central conflict, I think, between them is that, you know, one is a rich prince from Africa, and the other is a ghetto kid from Oakland, California.
Yeah.
Right. And I think kind of, you know, one of the things that makes the film so interesting is that it brings those two together. So, you know, it really is like it does have kind of a world scope. But actually, I think it's also interesting that the prince can only come from Africa, that the idea of an American black prince is almost unimaginable, and not only because the U.S. is a republic. One of the criticisms about the film has been, why are we still kind of using these old monarchical royalist tropes, right? Why can't you kind of imagine kind of a film or a comic book film that requires some kind of like royalty, and because also kind of the idea of royalty and so on is a very hierarchical society, right? So and within an American context, a black person can't be at the top of the pyramid, basically. So it's very interesting that the film does have this kind of royalist fairy tale thing, but it's kind of positing a prince against a ghetto kid, one African, one American. Do you have any problems with the film having that kind of royalist aspect?
I mean, it's not something that occurred to me particularly, but I guess the kind of idea that like there's a hegemony, isn't there, in Wakanda? Like it is in some respects. It's not the kind of cleanest country. Like it does have some history of kind of violence and sort of subterfuge to maintain power. And well, for instance, right at the start of the film, the king, is it T'Chaka?
Yeah, T'Chaka is the father.
T'Chaka, the father of T'Challa, when he's the king, he kills his brother.
Yes.
He
doesn't. He doesn't.
Yes, he does.
The Forrest Whitaker character does.
No, the Forrest Whitaker character. No, the brother is going to shoot the dad, the king, and Forrest Whitaker jumps in the way, and to save Forrest Whitaker, the king kills the brother.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
I mean, there's a whole Lion King thing going on. There kind of is like this fratricide, and there's the disfigured kind of brother character. I mean, he's actually Killmonger is a kind of classic villain in some respects, in that he's disfigured, right? There's a thing of how villains are disfigured in fiction, and actually his disfigurement's really interesting because it's these body modifications.
It's self-imposed.
It's self-imposed, right? So it's these body modifications that he's made to himself. These raised sort of things underneath his skin, and each one of them, each dot represents a kill, and he has the name Killmonger. It was given to him as a nickname in the special forces because he killed so many people in Afghanistan and Iraq, and his body is covered with these things. And actually, it reminds me of the Black Skinhead video for Kanye West's song, and I don't know if that's kind of drawing on other kind of black or African imagery itself. I just don't know the history of it, if there is one. But it reminds me very much of that, and that's his Black Power sort of anthem, Black Skinhead. But what's really interesting about those disfigurements to Killmonger is that they're self-imposed, but they come from killing, right? Like killing, the act of killing so much has disfigured him.
Yeah, well, he's disfigured himself.
He's disfigured himself, but then that kind of represents like a kind of mental disfigurement as well. Then that's what he's done to himself.
Yes, well, though you get the feeling in the film that that's not what he's done to himself. That's what's been done to him by an American culture that kills or incarcerates black people. Yeah, that kind of So I mean, basically, those are the two options for black men. Basically, you're either killed, everybody dies in this neighborhood, the sun says, or you're jailed, which is another kind of killing, really. So it's a place that doesn't leave much options.
No, that's absolutely right. That's a really good point. So yeah, like because, like I say, it's important that he has been trained by America, by the government, to become a killer, and so that kind of ultimately that is what's left the scars on him.
Yeah, but not just by the government, by him being an orphan, by his father being killed, by him being poor,
and having to go into that world.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, so I just think all of that is very interesting, and anyway. So this thing about
it's so much more complex. What do you expect from a Marvel movie? And you get this.
Yes, I know.
The standard is it's set a new standard for Marvel. That's
one of the things that I've just hated, though I should be used to it by now, is there's now a patterning of discussion about films, right? So a film comes out, And if it's like a Marvel film or whatever, all the fanboys come out and they say, "Oh, it's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful." 2 days later, somebody will say, "Oh, it's terrible, terrible, terrible." Right? And it doesn't do this and it doesn't do that and it doesn't do that and, black man this and fairy tales that and the monarchical this. And actually I think at a certain point people get so wrapped up in their own discussions, which actually have to do with other things. It's like, everybody tries to map their own project onto the film. And actually, by mapping their own projects onto the film gets thrown out the window, right? It's kind of, their own ideas are developed, and then the film fits into it to this point or not, and it's found lacking or praiseworthy in relation to their own idea of what they think it should be.
Yeah.
And I think I don't want to do this with this film because I think this is such an important film.
I don't think we have been doing it.
No, I don't think we've been doing it.
And I don't think anyone's been doing it. I mean,
I do think
the thing is, I think...
I think people have been doing it.
Well, I mean, from what I've seen on it, from the discussions that I've seen, like, when you compare it to the way that people have been talking about, for instance, 3 Billboards, there's been this kind of classic backlash to it, where it's like, it comes out, it's amazing, and then a couple of weeks later, it's rubbish. And it's like, there's no room in between, and people are just kind of spouting. And there seems to be no room for nuance. But I think everything that I've seen so far on Black Panther has been really in response to the text of the film.
Well... I think I'm not sure I agree. I mean, there have been like some fantastic pieces. Like the piece in the New Yorker has been fantastic, I think. And they've all offered interesting ideas. But nonetheless, I think there is this mapping on of their own desires onto the film, which I think is a measure of the success of the film, that it allows and encourages that. But I also think it's a problem. Right, like, I mean, I think this is an incredibly important film. For one thing, it's the only black superhero film. I mean, when watching it in Sweden, on the one hand, I kept thinking, what do all these Aryan Vikings see in it? And on the other hand, I thought, I mean, can't it be amazing? Like, imagine if you're a black kid in America or the Caribbean or Africa, and you get to see this, like, for the first time. Right, so I think it's not just that it's a black superhero film, but actually, if you think of, a really big budget action film with a black star in it, with all the production values, and with this narrative, I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah,
really,
weirdly, when you mention Thor, it's interesting. Like it's like a counterpart to Thor in some respects. Like it's about a secret world. For black people, about black people.
Yeah.
And it's like, and Thor is kind of the same, but for white people.
Yes.
It's like, and yeah, I mean, it could. How much more white could it be? It's set in Scandinavia. Well, not set in Scandinavia, but it's set in Scandinavian myth.
For a certain kind of white person, actually, because I was talking to my sister about this yesterday. Just out of my trip in Scandinavia, and you realize how all of the ideals of beauty in American cinema and classic Hollywood are really a Northern European ideal. There are all these kind of tall, blonde people with like cheekbones who, end up being the stars, right? And actually one of the things about this film is that it highlights, so on the one hand, it's a multicultural, multinational cast, right? It's made of British actors and American and Nigerian and South African and and it kind of it enables you to see these people in a different way. I mean, they're all very attractive, and they're all kind of powerful, and they're all really smart, right? And they're funny, right? So there's kind of like a range of characteristics that are brought or that are attributed or displayed or dramatized, that one rarely gets a chance to see.
And I think something that's really interesting as well is the film. Films about good guys and bad guys so very often are, the bad guy is just kind of is just villainous the whole way through. He's thrown away, particularly in Marvel. They're just how many Marvel villains can you really remember? But what this film does is it has like a level of empathy for everybody. It understands everyone, even Claw, really, who's the kind of, I suppose, most villainous character insofar as he's just kind of out and out murderer, and he's there for money, you know. But even he's portrayed as just enjoying himself and having a good time. And so, like, although the film doesn't really say, you know, you can understand this guy or you should, you know, he has a point or whatever. He doesn't really, but he's at least having a good time. Whereas everyone else is the film has time for, and they have real characteristics and personalities, and they're rich, and the film kind of enables you to empathise with everybody, no matter kind of what their opinion or who they are.
Yes.
Like, also the difference between the tribes. You know, some of them want to be more involved than others. Some of them they have different reasons. So, for instance, the tribe led by Daniel Kaluuya's character, kind of teams up with Killmonger. And you understand why, right? Like, he has a different opinion on the way that Wakanda should be run and the way that their technology should be used than the rest of the tribes do. And although that kind of makes him slightly villainous because he's teaming up with the antagonist, you understand him and you understand why he's saying that.
I'm not sure about that, actually. I think that's a weakness in the film because the reason is attributed to T'Challa coming back without Claw.
Yeah.
You know, and actually to me that's not sufficient because actually we know why T'Challa didn't come back without Claw. And it seems to me that, you know, he should have been able to imagine that, you know, they just couldn't get him.
Well, yeah,
you know, so I think to betray his childhood friend...
But it doesn't mean that you don't understand him. Like, he has, like... Because the reason that he wants Claw to come back, the reason that it's so important to him that Claw is either brought back or killed, is because he killed his dad. He lost his dad to him years ago. Well... So that's a deep-seated reason.
I think it's a minor weakness in the film.
Because the one who does actually bring Claw back, dead, is the one who wins his support.
It's Killmonger. Yes. But... So it has a kind of a logic, but I think, you know, to me, that aspect of it is not
you find that lacking?
Sufficient. Yes.
What about the...
But I want to talk about one thing, because... So I want to get back to this thing about how the film's received, because one of the things in the 1980s, you know, that was kind of like part of the discourse on cinema was like this notion of the burden of representation with minority films. Right, so that this idea that because there were so few black films or gay films or women's films, that, you know, like there was a burden of representation on them, that people, you know, that one little film. So, you know, whereas white people, you saw white people being plantation owners and Western heroes and call girls and mothers and blah, 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 right? The full range of kind of human emotion and also occupations and nationalities and whatever. There were so few films about gays or women or black people that, you know, even their own communities found fault with it because the question was, oh, well, it didn't do this or it didn't do that. And of course, no one film can do it all. And actually, I think that some of the response in relation to Black Panther recalls some of those debates on the burden of representation, that, you know, kind of, they're asking things of the film, you know, the film doesn't set out to do or can do, or, you know.
For instance?
Well, I mean, you know, this thing about kind of, you know, the representation of black men, of black masculinity. I think the film, you know, has so many interesting things that it does with that, right? That to insist that it doesn't do something else is, you know, part of the sense of, you know, having the one black superhero Marvel film, you know, having to please everybody all over the world, in fact.
I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, to be more demanding of this, especially within the context of a Marvel film. You know, I mean, it does sound silly to say, but like this is a Disney movie, right? Like that last line that Killmonger has about the slaves who threw themselves off the ship. That's to hear that in a Disney movie. Like, the world is kind of changing a little bit, right?
Well, actually, I forget where I read this, but there was something about, you know, that the Atlantic was littered with an invisible railroad of corpses of black people, right, that had either jumped off the ship or died on the ship and been thrown off the ship, and and so that line of Killmonger's resonates with that, right? And so, you know, to have a mainstream American film evoke that history, which I think it does, and actually be so critical of the way that things are. I mean, I just think it's an amazing achievement.
He reminds me of Magneto, Killmonger, in a way. In the relationship between Magneto and Dr. X throughout X-Men, Dr. X, Professor X throughout X-Men, is because the thing about X-Men was it was always taken to be this kind of fairly overt representation of, or not representation, allegory of gay civil rights, particularly.
Yes.
The idea of gay people being outcast and kind of, but being able to hide in plain sight in the way that kind of, it doesn't really work with black people because you can tell someone is black by looking at them. So there's this thing in X-Men of like, you can't tell they're a mutant until you can.
Yes.
Or until they show you whatever it is. And so Magneto was very much of this kind of militaristic,
let's fight back and
let's
kill
fight back
first.
kind of thing, and Dr. X was more of a let's integrate and teach the normal people, normal in quote, about us. And there is another, and again, the kind of the conversation between T'Challa and Killmonger is very much like that. I think, I mean, I'd love if only there was more conversation between them. They really only have 2 scenes. It's not.
My God,
but what's better in this is that the thing about Magneto and Professor X was that they never really learned anything or changed each other, right? They just kind of, the conversation just went on and on and on. Whereas in this, like, what ultimately happens is T'Challa changes because of his experience with Killmonger.
Yes.
And that's fantastic. That's really important. Like, and also the idea of Killmonger isn't coming back, right? Like you have if you look at Thor and Loki's just coming back and back and back and back. There's more and more Loki. But like in this, like you go, okay, so maybe Killmonger should come back and it would be great to see him again because he's such a good character. But actually what really, really makes him a great character is that he dies for what he believes in, and he dies kind of maintaining that. And the fact that he won't come back it makes him more impactful and more memorable.
Yes. And I think it's such a great performance by Michael B. Jordan. Mm. I mean, it's not... I was a bit torn because, I was saying, I'm not sure if it's a great performance. But the thing is, he's so charismatic, right? That kind of... It's almost like you lose track. I mean, in terms of, the emotion that he's conveying at any one given moment, or just, that he's so charismatic, and at moments he's so good, and certainly kind of physically he presents such a heroic figure in battle that's just extraordinary, right?
Yeah.
He is just the most memorable thing in the film, really.
There was something else I noted about the film's representation of women, which is that Nakia is the love interest of T'Challa.
Yes.
But she's not a prize to be won,
yes.
Right? She actually, right from the very beginning, they're talking about, I want you to be my queen. And she says, no, I'm not interested in that.
I have a calling.
But she, not only is she the one, she believes in Wakanda should behave a certain way. She believes that Wakanda should be open and share itself with the world, which goes against what T'Challa believes. He believes in continuing to hide and protect itself. And at the same time, he's kind of constantly going, "Oh, be my wife," and right at the end, she accepts that, and she accepts it because he has changed, and what's important is that she can accept it. She's not just one; she has agency, and actually, throughout the film, like there's no question that she is the one who's able to make the choice about whether she likes him or not. So he steals a kiss, which is a bit cheeky, but then she reciprocates, so there's no need for a Me Too moment.
I want to mention some of the other people. I mean, I think it's brilliantly cast, right? I think everyone is very memorable in it. But I particularly want to mention Angela Bassett and Forrest Whitaker as just kind of iconic presences that are brought to bear on this film and that have a history in American film, and then kind of putting that together with that largely African cast. I mean, one of the things that I loved about this film was the way that people spoke, right? So when they say, "I never freeze," right? Like,
I never freeze.
Yeah, it's like a joy to hear. And I loved the sister who I forget what the name of the actress is, and then also that other prince who has his own tribe and who challenged T'Challa for.
Yeah, I was going to mention him as well. Let me just double check.
Winston Duke was fantastic.
M'Baku.
Yeah, and he's from Trinidad. So actually, you do get kind of, a full African diaspora represented in this film.
What's really interesting to me about him and his character is his tribe barks, right? And it's this quite deliberate thing. And I was thinking about, because they do it throughout, and it's this intimidating kind of war cry almost. They are kind of warlike, and they're warriors, and they separate themselves and live in the mountains. And when the CIA guy speaks up, he goes, "Arf, arf, arf," and everyone starts barking at him to shut him down. And that kind of made me think. I don't know how deliberate this is. I think it must be. It made me think of how when slaves were trying to escape, they would be hunted down with dogs, and it's rather like it's rather like the insult cracker, which I never really understood before. And then I found out it's about the crack of the slave whip, and how so you refer to white people as crackers because they were the slave masters, and I think it's about that, right? That kind of barking to shut down the CIA guys about that, but then they also do it like the whole rest of the time, which is not about that, and it just feels a bit more like the Baha Men or something.
I don't know. I thought that was wonderful. I thought he was wonderful. I thought the joke about vegetarianism, which draws on all these prejudices of Africa and preconceptions of African people and culture.
And also, I love how much he can't stop himself laughing at his own joke there.
Yes.
It's a really wonderful touch.
Yes, it is.
He finds himself so funny. Think about Ryan Coogler, right? He's written and directed 3 films. Fruitvale Station, which was great. Then he did Creed, which is kind of
it's fantastic.
Which is but it's like an independent movie, but it's about as big as independent movie gets before it becomes a studio property, right? Like it still has that independent ethos, but it's also huge because it's a Rocky film.
Yeah.
And then his third film is Black Panther, which is like
all with Michael B. Jordan.
All with Michael B. Jordan. You can't make a bigger film than the Marvel movie, and to maintain it's rather like in that Thor Ragnarok way, Marvel getting in a real artist and an individual voice that sings, and because I remember we said about Thor Ragnarok, it's like Taika Waititi is kind of struggling to break out of Marvel's world and actually not quite successfully, whereas this.
It's most successful. Actually,
Ryan Coogler makes it his own.
The only grating moment for me in the whole film, it was when that bloody Stanley appears.
Yeah.
I'm just getting so sick of it. I mean, it's not an endearing thing like, when Hitchcock appears, right? And sometimes actually Hitchcock, would only appear as an advertisement or as a minor thing, or, whereas this is giving a scene each time to that bloody Stanley. I just hate it.
And also the thing about Hitchcock was that he started to get annoyed with it himself because people would expect it, and so he had to do it within like the first 2 or 3 minutes of his movies because he said people are just going to ignore the movie until I show up. So he kind of understood that this was not a joke anymore. It was too distracting.
It is,
and that's exactly what the Stan Lee thing is.
Yeah, it is. Anyway, that's the one thing.
The one thing I wanted to say though, going back to Ryan Coogler and Michael B. Jordan, is this is their third collaboration. Jordan's been in all of Coogler's movies. I don't remember if this was a detail of his character in Fruitvale Station, but it's certainly a detail of his character in Creed and Black Panther that he grew up without a father figure.
Yes.
And I wonder if that's important to you. I wonder if that means something to you.
I don't know. I think if I remember Fruitvale Station correctly, I think he is. I could be wrong, but well, first
thing I just don't remember Fruitvale.
He's a father, right? So the whole narrative of Fruitvale Station is himself leaving a child fatherless.
Yeah.
Right. And I also seem to think that the mother is referred to in Fruitvale Station. I don't remember a father being referred to.
So I think it's not so much obviously because if the analogy again only goes so far because this is a comic book movie. So the reason that he's grown up without a father in Black Panther is because his dad was killed by his brother. But obviously it's not like kind of gang violence or anything kind of you could really relate to. It's this kingly matter. So like but
it is related.
The analogy only goes so far. But the the point is that the effect that lack of a father has on the kid is what's important, I think.
No, but also it's visualized as a kind of gang violence, because if you remember the apartment, they've got guns and they think the police is coming, they're hiding stuff. So actually, I think it is meant to evoke that.
Yes.
So I think there are continuities, but I think I'm not fit at the moment to kind of pursue or investigate those continuities, really. I think the only thing I want to say is that, he's a terrific director in great control of his material. I can't imagine anybody else who could have done this film that feels, on the one hand, exciting, it fits into the whole of the Marvel universe, and on the other hand, it's kind of woven through with a depth of knowledge of African American cultures.
Yeah, give me one second, because there was something else I wanted to bring up. It was about one of those articles. It was about the one that we disagreed with, that you put on Facebook. Because as I say, this conversation has been ongoing previous to the podcast. Black Panther is not the movie we deserve. An article in Boston Review by Christopher LeBron, which was a really, really thought-provoking article. There was quite a lot in the article that I disagreed with or thought was just kind of slightly wrong-headed. Like you can't deny someone's experience of the film, right? Like, but it's interesting to talk about, and I think we have actually covered a lot of it already with what we've been saying, because it's just informs, kind of what we've been talking about. But there's one point in particular where he talks about if one surveys this is a quote from the article. If one surveys the Marvel Cinematic Universe, one finds that the main villains, even those far more destructive than Killmonger, died frequently. They're formidable enemies who live to challenge the hero again and again. A particularly poignant example is Loki, brother to Thor, the god of thunder. Loki is single-handedly responsible for incalculable misery and damage. His power play leads to an alien invasion that nearly levels all of Manhattan. Yet Thor keeps letting him go. I'm paraphrasing. Even as Loki tries to kill Thor. Loki even gets his turn to be a good guy in Thor Ragnarok. Loki gets multiple unearned chances to redeem himself no matter what damage he's done. Killmonger, however, will not appear in another movie, as we've mentioned already. He dies. He does not get a second chance. His black life did not matter even in a world of flying cars and miracle medicine. Why? Perhaps Killmonger's main dream to free black people everywhere decisively earns him the fate of death. We know from previous Marvel movies that Killmonger's desire for revenge is not the necessary condition to eliminate him. Loki's seeming permanence is proof. And this idea of redemption, right? I think that what struck me about that is that Killmonger doesn't need redeeming, right? Like Killmonger isn't doing anything wrong as far as he's concerned, and actually the film respects what he believes about himself
and represents
it to the point where he dies for it. Like actually his death is
heroic,
right,
and poetic.
Yeah, I think actually the idea of I get the idea that like this, I get the objection to how come Loki keeps getting to live, but this guy dies when Loki's far more destructive. But actually,
because Loki's not as significant.
Loki doesn't believe in anything, and it's not important. It's so meaningful when Killmonger dies.
Loki is a narrative function, whereas I think Killmonger dying is a kind of the poeticizing of an idea.
Yeah. He's a guy who believes in something meaningful and stands up for it until the end. So, like, he is a murderer, he's incredibly violent and destructive, and he's too far gone to save. But actually, he doesn't need redeeming, and actually, he'd turn redemption down if we offered it to him. He'd find it insulting.
Yes.
Okay,
good. I think we need to wrap up.
I mean, imagine how much tamer the film would be if the enemy was white, for instance. Like, think about black empowerment of, like, well, the villain has to die, but like, what's more empowering than everybody being black and everyone's kind of opinion being taken seriously, and the issues really being talked about?
Well, I think that's why Claw is kind of killed early.
Yeah.
But we need to wrap up. Okay, final verdict on the film. I mean, there's a lot more we can say, and we barely scratched the surface, and that really is a credit to the film. It's a really rich and rewarding film. It's by far, I think, the best in all of the Marvel universe so far. Any last words over to you, Mike?
No, I don't think so. It's really, really good. It's really good in every way. I can't think of a flaw.
Well, this is from our second viewing, so if you get a chance, go see it. It's well worth it on every level.
Yeah, but I mean, you should have seen it before listening to this. I'm sure you have, frankly, because everyone's seen it already.
Well, all the more reasons to listen to us then.
Yeah. We're we're on Facebook, Eavesdropping at the Movies. We're on Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies. We're on. You can email us eavesdroppingatthemovies@gmail.com. And iTunes and SoundCloud and stuff.
Okay. So
get in touch and all the rest, and like, share, and subscribe.
Yes. Thanks for listening. Kind of all of the comments have gone to Mike's head now.
I thank you everyone who decided to get in touch and tell me that I particularly am great, because look, I have an ego and it needs feeding.
Yes. Well, facts is facts.
And now I have been fed.
All right, good. You're fat on it.
See you later.
Good.